The courtroom was filled with the usual hum of paperwork and whispered conversations when the doors suddenly swung open. All eyes turned toward the entrance as the unmistakable sound of high heels echoed across the polished marble floor. Veronica Lee Hale, the daughter of the powerful Hale oil family, had entered the room. Her confidence was undeniable. She didn't walk into the courtroom like a defendant facing charges. She strode in like a CEO entering her own office. With her perfect posture and designer attire, including a jacket so expensive it could have paid someone's rent for a year, Veronica was used to the world bending to her will. A $50,000 Hermes Birkin bag hung from her arm, and diamond jewelry flashed with every movement. Behind her, an assistant struggled to keep up, carrying a heavy leather portfolio, and Veronica paid no attention to her. To her, this wasn't a courtroom. It was a minor inconvenience, one she expected to be done with quickly. As the case was called, she didn't step forward immediately. Instead, she casually strolled to the defendant's table, her heels clicking with every step. When she reached the bench, she removed her sunglasses with 2 fingers, as if the judge should be grateful for her attention. She laughed softly, dismissively, and muttered, "Let's get this over with." The people in the gallery exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen anyone enter a courtroom with such arrogance. One man in the back row muttered, "She's got no respect." An elderly woman shook her head, clearly unimpressed by the show of entitlement. Judge Caprio, ever calm and composed, studied her with a mixture of curiosity and quiet disapproval. He had seen arrogance before, but there was something about this woman's presence that felt particularly out of place. She wasn't here to take responsibility for her actions. She was here to negotiate her way out of it. "Good morning, Miss Hale," Judge Caprio said, his voice smooth and respectful but with a subtle edge. Veronica didn't bother to acknowledge him properly. Instead, she casually flicked her hair back and replied, "Let's see how long this takes, Judge." The tension in the room was palpable as people tried to process the nerve this woman had. She didn't apologize, didn't offer any respect, and didn't even acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. For her, this was just another meeting to check off her list. Judge Caprio's expression remained unchanged, but those who knew him could sense the subtle shift. He had encountered all kinds of people in his courtroom, but rarely did someone approach him with this level of entitlement. "Do you understand the charges against you?" Judge Caprio asked, his tone still measured. Veronica exhaled, clearly annoyed. "I understand this is a waste of everyone's time," she replied flippantly. "I stopped for 3 minutes. No one was using the lane. If anything, I was helping the clinic by not blocking their driveway." The gallery was silent, watching her every move, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Judge Caprio calmly closed the file in front of him. "A fire lane is not optional, Miss Hale," he said, his voice firm. "Your actions put people's lives at risk." Veronica smirked as if this were all just a misunderstanding, an inconvenient blip in her otherwise perfect day. "Everything's optional when you know how to manage things," she retorted confidently. "And besides, my family donates millions to this state." The courtroom gasped, her words hanging in the air like a cold breeze. People were beginning to see just how far Veronica believed her wealth could stretch, and how little she seemed to understand the responsibility that came with it. "You don't get to bypass the law just because you have money," Judge Caprio replied, his tone still calm but growing firmer. "This isn't about generosity. It's about the law, Miss Hale." As the judge continued, Veronica's confident smirk remained, but now there was a slight flicker of something else, perhaps unease. She had underestimated the gravity of the situation. She thought her wealth and name could solve everything, but she was quickly learning that in Judge Caprio's courtroom, those things didn't matter. "I've been in meetings that required more focus than this," Veronica continued dismissively, trying to maintain control of the narrative. "Let's just get it over with. I've got a board meeting in an hour." Little did she know, the real story wasn't just about her parking ticket. Judge Caprio had uncovered something much deeper, a pattern of behavior that would change everything. Stay tuned to see how the arrogant billionaire's attitude comes crashing down. As Judge Caprio flipped through the pages of the case file, Veronica's confident facade began to crack just slightly. She was used to controlling every room she entered, and for a moment she thought the courtroom would bend to her will, just as her company's donations had often bought influence elsewhere. But the judge was not easily swayed. "You're here for a fire lane violation," Judge Caprio continued, his voice calm yet steady. "But this is not the first time you've been issued a warning. 8 months ago, you were cited for a similar violation at St. Mark's Children's Hospital." Veronica shifted in her seat. She hadn't anticipated this. The realization that her behavior was part of an ongoing pattern caught her off guard. She had assumed this was just a small issue, a trivial case to get past. But now the judge was making it clear that it was much bigger. 8 months ago, you blocked an emergency access lane at the children's hospital for over 15 minutes, Judge Caprio continued, unbothered by her unease. And when you were asked to move, you ignored the officer's instructions. Veronica shrugged dismissively, her arms folding across her chest in a defensive gesture. That's an exaggeration, she said, trying to brush it off. The hospital has multiple entrances. I was there for a meeting. Nothing happened. No one was even in any danger. The gallery around her stiffened, but the judge did not flinch. The hospital staff says differently, he said, his tone unwavering. They report that an ambulance had to reroute because of your vehicle. 3 minutes were lost as a result of your decision to ignore the law. That delay could have made all the difference. Veronica let out an impatient sigh, her earlier confidence now replaced with irritation. 3 minutes? Really, Judge? We're making a big deal over 3 minutes. Her voice was laced with sarcasm, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would care about such a trivial amount of time. But Judge Caprio was unmoved. You may not think those minutes matter, Miss Hale, but the people in that ambulance did. You were in the way of emergency personnel trying to save a life. A silence fell over the courtroom, and for the first time, Veronica looked around, sensing the weight of the moment. But she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in this way. It's not my fault if people get upset over minor inconveniences, Veronica muttered, her tone growing defensive. I did what I needed to do. The world doesn't stop for every little rule. Judge Caprio's gaze sharpened. That's where you're wrong, he said. You're not just breaking a rule. You're putting lives at risk. And it's not just one person you're impacting. It's the entire community that depends on these laws being followed. Your attitude, that the rules don't apply to you, affects everyone around you. The courtroom was still. Everyone was hanging on the judge's words, feeling the weight of the lesson he was imparting. But Veronica, caught in her own world of privilege and power, didn't see it that way. You don't understand, she snapped, leaning forward. I built this company. I've worked harder than anyone in this room. You think I don't know the value of time? Time is money and every second counts. Her words echoed in the room, but instead of garnering respect, they only seemed to reinforce her sense of entitlement. Judge Caprio was not impressed. Time is valuable, Miss Hale, he said, but it is not more valuable than human life. And you've used your power to dismiss the law like it's some inconvenience. That's not something anyone can ignore. Veronica crossed her arms, her face hardening with defiance. She thought of the many doors her name had opened, the wealth she controlled, the connections she had. In her mind, that power should have been enough to erase the inconvenience of a ticket. But the judge wasn't going to let her off so easily. You don't understand, she muttered again, a little softer this time, but still carrying the weight of entitlement in her words. Judge Caprio didn't respond immediately. Instead, he flipped through the file and then asked the courtroom staff to display the security footage from the clinic where she had parked in the fire lane. Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but her defiance remained. When the footage was played, it showed Veronica's SUV parked squarely in the fire lane, clearly blocking emergency access. The officer's voice could be heard in the background, asking her to move her vehicle. The footage then showed Veronica's dismissive response, ignoring the officer, refusing to move, and only rolling her window down after several attempts to communicate. Veronica's face flushed as the evidence of her arrogance played out on the screen. She hadn't expected to see herself like this. The person on the video was someone she didn't recognize, a version of herself that felt disconnected from the woman she had worked so hard to become. This footage doesn't show the full picture, Veronica quickly interjected, but her voice lacked the usual conviction. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to cause any harm. Judge Caprio paused the video. Miss Hale, it's clear from this footage that you were dismissive of a public servant simply doing their job. And the consequences of that attitude are more serious than you realize. For the first time, Veronica looked less certain of herself. Her shoulders tensed and she sat back in her chair, finally starting to grasp the severity of her actions. As the security footage ended, the room was heavy with silence. Veronica sat frozen, her usual poise shattered. She had been so sure of herself, so confident that her wealth and status could shield her from consequences. But the evidence was undeniable, and the room was beginning to turn against her. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Veronica. He wasn't angry, but his gaze carried the weight of someone who had seen this kind of arrogance before. He had witnessed people in positions of power dismissing the law as if it were beneath them. But this was different. Veronica's entitlement wasn't just about breaking the rules. It was about believing that the rules didn't apply to her at all. "Miss Hale," he said slowly, breaking the silence, "you've had your say. Now I'll speak." Veronica's expression tightened, but she didn't interrupt. She had no choice but to listen. "Your arrogance today has been striking," Judge Caprio continued. "You've come into this courtroom acting as if the law is something to be negotiated, as if you can buy your way out of responsibility. You think you can dismiss the rules, dismiss public safety because you're rich. But money doesn't buy immunity. And the law doesn't bend for anyone, no matter how many donations they make or how many zeros are in their bank account." Veronica's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but words didn't come. She was trapped, and for the first time in this entire ordeal she realized it. Her wealth had shielded her from consequences for years, but today in Judge Caprio's courtroom, there would be no exceptions. "I'm not trying to teach you a lesson in humility, Ms. Hale," the judge continued, "because it's clear that lesson has yet to sink in. But what I will teach you today is this: the law is not a tool to be wielded by the powerful. It is a shield for everyone." Veronica opened her mouth again, but she quickly snapped it shut. There was no use arguing anymore. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. Judge Caprio had taken control, and she was no longer the untouchable billionaire with influence and connections. "What you fail to understand," Judge Caprio said, "is that your actions, your complete disregard for the law, don't just affect you. They affect everyone. And they affect them in ways you'll never know because you live in a world where money and status shield you from the consequences of your choices." Veronica sat back, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her jaw clenched. She was silent now, but inside, her thoughts raced. She had always believed that power could fix anything, but now the judge was showing her the truth. Power couldn't fix this. Not this time. The judge paused and turned toward the courtroom staff. "Ms. Hale," he said, "you were issued a fine for the fire lane violation. That fine will be the least of your problems today. You will also be ordered to attend 50 hours of community service with the Providence Fire Department. You'll attend emergency safety workshops and speak directly with paramedics who risk their lives every day. And you'll learn exactly what those few seconds of delay in the fire lane meant." Veronica's face hardened. "Community service?" she repeated, incredulous. "I'm a CO judge. I don't have time for this." Judge Caprio's gaze was unwavering. "Then maybe this will be a valuable lesson in time management. When you're not in control, when you're not the one calling the shots, maybe you'll understand what it means to truly serve others." Her assistant, still standing by her side, looked away, clearly embarrassed by Veronica's behavior. It was clear to everyone in the room that even the people closest to her were beginning to lose their patience. "But there's more," Judge Caprio said, his voice quiet but resolute. "You will also be required to record a public service message. The message will play before municipal traffic hearings, reminding people of one simple truth: fire lanes are not optional. They're for emergencies. Not for convenience. Not for people who think the rules don't apply to them." Veronica's eyes narrowed. This was not what she had expected. She had come into the courtroom expecting a fine, maybe a warning, something she could pay off and move on from. But now she was facing a public reckoning. "No," she said, her voice wavering. "I won't do it. I'm not going to publicly apologize for a parking ticket." Judge Caprio's expression softened just slightly. "You don't have to apologize, Ms. Hale. You just have to show that you understand the consequences of your actions." Her jaw clenched. "I understand. But this is humiliating." The judge didn't respond to her. Instead, he turned to the gallery, where the people who had witnessed the exchange were waiting for the final judgment. "This is not about humiliation," Judge Caprio said, his voice calm. "This is about understanding responsibility. Realizing that the choices we make don't just affect us. They affect everyone around us. And when you're in a position like Ms. Hale's, when you have power, when you have influence, the consequences are even greater. And so, the responsibility to act with respect is even more important." Veronica shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the attention. She had spent her life demanding respect, but now in this room she was learning that respect was earned, not bought. Judge Caprio stood up and looked at Veronica one last time. "This case is now closed," he said, his voice carrying weight. "But I want you to remember something, Ms. Hale. True power isn't in the money you have or the status you've built. It's in the humility to admit when you've made a mistake and the courage to change. As the courtroom emptied, Veronica sat there for a long time, her mind reeling. She had learned something today, something far deeper than any fine or punishment could teach her. But there was still one final moment that would define her. The days following Judge Caprio's ruling were a whirlwind of emotions for Veronica. Her lawyer had been working tirelessly to minimize the public fallout, but the damage had already been done. For the first time in her life, Veronica found herself in a position where money couldn't fix everything. Her usual method of throwing money at a problem to make it go away wasn't going to work this time. The public service announcement was the most difficult part. Veronica had agreed to do it, but she had no idea what it would mean to stand before a camera and speak about the very thing she had spent her entire life avoiding. Her wealth and power had always made her feel invincible, but now, standing in front of a camera, facing the consequences of her actions, she was vulnerable in a way she had never been before. The day of the recording, Veronica arrived at the local public access station, a place she would have never imagined herself stepping foot in. The building was small and unassuming, a far cry from the luxury of her usual boardrooms and gala events. As she walked through the front doors, the staff barely acknowledged her presence. It wasn't a cold reception, it was a lack of reception altogether. No one seemed impressed by her designer blazer or the diamond necklace still around her neck. In this place, Veronica was just another person, a far cry from the woman who thought the world bent to her will. She was led into a small recording room where a basic camera sat on a tripod. A microphone hung above her, and there was a large, illuminated screen in front of her with a few bullet points to guide her speech. Veronica stood there for a moment, eyeing the setup, before her assistant reminded her to stay focused. The technician adjusted the lighting as Veronica tried to gather herself. She wasn't used to this. She was used to giving speeches to thousands of people, addressing issues with confidence, but this felt different. The weight of what she had to say and what it meant was suddenly all too real. The technician gave her a thumbs up, signaling that they were ready to begin. Veronica took a deep breath and walked toward the camera. She had been told to keep the message simple, but the magnitude of her actions was anything but simple. She adjusted her blazer and looked into the lens, suddenly unsure of what to say. "Hello," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Veronica Lee Hale, and I'm here today to address something I never thought I'd be speaking about: my violation of fire lane laws. I know it sounds trivial, but I've learned in the hardest way that it's not." Her words were measured, almost rehearsed. She had never been the type to apologize, not in public, not for anything. But here she was, giving an apology. It wasn't just about the parking ticket. It was about the way she had treated others, the way she had believed that the rules were something to be bent or ignored because she had the means to do so. "I thought I was above the law," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought that because I'm in a position of power, my time was more important than the safety of others. But I was wrong. What I failed to understand is that those fire lanes aren't just lines on the pavement. They're there for a reason. They're there to save lives. And I didn't just block a lane. I blocked access to help." Her words felt foreign to her. She had spent so many years defending her actions, justifying her behavior, and now she was standing in front of the camera, admitting her faults. She wasn't used to feeling exposed, vulnerable, but today she was. "I'm sorry," Veronica said, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry to the people I've disrespected. I'm sorry to the officer who tried to do his job. I'm sorry to the people I've hurt with my arrogance." As she spoke, her thoughts drifted back to the day in the courtroom when Judge Caprio had looked at her with such disappointment. He had expected more from her. He had given her the opportunity to show that she understood, but until now she hadn't fully understood what that meant. It wasn't just about apologizing. It was about taking accountability for the people her actions affected. The ones who didn't have the luxury of being able to pay off their mistakes. Veronica's eyes flickered slightly as she tried to steady her emotions. She had always been the one in control, always the one who knew what to say and how to handle a situation. But now, in front of the camera, she had to confront the truth, not just the truth of what she had done, but the truth about who she had become. "I've been fortunate in many ways," Veronica continued, her voice now gaining strength. "I've built something from the ground up and I've created opportunities for others. But none of that gives me the right to ignore the rules that protect everyone. The truth is, no one is above the law, not me, not anyone. And I've learned that the hard way." She paused, looking directly into the camera, the words now flowing more freely, more honestly than she had expected. "It's time I used my position, my voice, for something more than myself. And I hope this message helps someone out there understand that no matter who you are, the law matters. Respect for others matters. And it's time we all start holding ourselves accountable for the choices we make. As the camera signaled that the recording was over, Veronica stood there for a moment, still. Her reflection in the monitor caught her off guard. Not the powerful businesswoman she had always seen, but a woman who had finally begun to understand what true responsibility meant. But there was still the final part of her sentence that she hadn't yet experienced: the community service. Veronica's first day of community service with the Providence Fire Department's public education team was nothing like she expected. She had imagined herself walking into a small classroom, giving a few speeches to a group of uninterested locals, then heading back to her office where she could put this all behind her. But reality, as it often does, had a way of humbling her in ways that money could not. The firehouse was nothing like the luxury office building she was accustomed to. It was simple, functional, and yet, despite its modesty, it had a presence that demanded respect. The firefighters moved quickly, their actions precise and efficient, their focus entirely on their jobs. No one had time to acknowledge her arrival. Veronica was ushered into the back office, where she met her community service coordinator, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s named Caroline. Caroline wasn't impressed by Veronica's name or her designer suit. She had a job to do, and Veronica was part of that job. "You'll be with us for the next 50 hours, Caroline said, her tone clipped but not unkind. "I expect you to be present. You're not here to just show up for a few hours. You're here to work. Got it?" Veronica nodded, unsure of how this was going to go. She wasn't used to being treated like this, like an equal, but it was quickly becoming clear that Caroline wasn't going to coddle her. The first task for the day was an educational seminar at a local high school. Veronica had assumed she would be sitting in the back, observing, maybe making a short speech, but Caroline had other plans. "You're going to help me run this," she said, handing Veronica a stack of pamphlets about fire safety. "And you're going to speak to these kids about fire lanes. About the importance of them and why people need to respect them. Not from a place of privilege but from a place of humility. You understand?" Veronica's face flushed slightly. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. She was used to controlling the narrative, not becoming part of it. But she knew she had no choice but to do as she was told. They arrived at the school, and Veronica followed Caroline into a small auditorium filled with high school students. The room fell silent when they entered, the students' eyes on Veronica, the woman they had likely seen on magazine covers and charity events. The contrast was stark, the well-dressed woman in a sharp suit standing before a group of young, diverse students, some of whom were barely paying attention to the presentation. Caroline gave her a nod, and Veronica stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. For a moment she froze. The weight of the room, the energy, the eyes on her, was different than anything she had ever experienced. She wasn't a billionaire CEO anymore. She was just another person here to talk to kids about fire lanes. She took a deep breath, cleared her throat, and began, "I want to talk to you today about something I never thought was important enough to discuss. Fire lanes. I know it seems trivial, but I've learned the hard way that they aren't just lines on the pavement. They're there for a reason. They exist to keep people safe." Her voice was steady, but something inside her had shifted. The words didn't come with arrogance, but with the realization of just how much she had taken for granted in her life. How much she had ignored the small, everyday rules that people depended on. "I'm someone who used to think fire lanes were just an inconvenience. I thought I was above them," Veronica continued. "But now I realize that those fire lanes aren't there for people to park in when they're too busy or too important to move. They're there for emergencies, for people's lives. I learned that the hard way." The students were quiet, listening now, not because she was Veronica Lee Hale, the billionaire's daughter, but because her words had weight. For the first time in a long while, she felt the power of vulnerability, of speaking the truth. When the seminar ended, Caroline handed Veronica a fire safety manual and said, "You did good. It wasn't just the speech though. You listened. You got it. Now let's go clean the station." Cleaning the fire station was nothing like the glamorous life Veronica had been accustomed to. It was scrubbing floors, washing the windows, and polishing the trucks. No amount of wealth or status could speed up the work. There was no shortcut, no way to rush through it. She had to do it just like everyone else. Over the next few weeks, Veronica's perception of what was important began to shift. She spent hours alongside the firefighters, learning about their jobs, understanding the pressures they faced, and seeing firsthand how much they sacrificed to ensure public safety. These were the people who made the difference not because of their wealth, but because of their dedication to serving others. And then came the moment that she hadn't expected. She stood in front of a small group of local business owners at a community safety meeting. She had been asked to give another speech, this time not about fire lanes, but about community responsibility. And in that moment, she understood what Judge Caprio had been trying to teach her. Responsibility isn't about what you can afford to fix, she said, her voice steady and clear. It's about what you can't fix. It's about the people you can't pay to solve your problems. I've learned that the hard way, but I'm learning. We all have a responsibility to the community, and we can't just pay our way out of it. The room was quiet for a moment, and then there was a round of applause. It wasn't loud or thunderous.